how you grew up, a little bit about yourself, and
So it's a privilege and pleasure for me to be here. First of all, I love chatting with you. If we could just record all our conversations, I think that would be fun, I mean, we have some kind of common background. I don't know if your viewers know this, but you're Russian speaking,
Yes.
as am I. Were you actually born here or no?
No, I was born in Tashkent.
You were born in Tashkent. How old were you when you came over?
I was about 7.
You're 7, so that's
Yeah.
why your English is perfect. Like if someone met you, they'd think you're born here.
Right.
But what's amazing is, so I was born here, so I consider myself to speak fluent Russian because my parents are both, my father's Ukrainian, my mother's Russian, but in the home they always spoke Russian, so it's my first language. But your Russian is way better than mine. Your Russian is like,
Wow, thank you.
literally, it's funny nowadays. You could practice whatever language you want to practice with ChatGPT.
Right.
But one of the only issues, I mean, there's probably a lot of issues, but one of the issues with AI is it just panders to you. It just tells you what you want to hear, pretty much. So, my parents always say that my Russian's not so good. And that's actually one of the few things in my life that insults me, So I always insist that my Russian's pretty good with them, and they're like, not really. Fine. So I started practicing with ChatGPT. ChatGPT is telling me, yeah, your Russian's pretty good. So then I started asking, I'm like, well, is it good enough to be like a news anchor in Russia? And I don't know why I have like a woman's voice in ChatGPT. She's like, well, this is all in Russian. She's like, well, a news anchor has to really have a strong command of the language. I don't know if you could handle that. I said, well, what about going to university in Russia? And she's like, you probably need to, нужно потянуть чуть-чуть. It's like you got to pull your language up a little bit, just a little more.
That's a great conversation. I actually heard that one.
Yeah, I sent it to you, right? I recorded it. It was very funny. But but bottom line is, I have a background like a lot of other, I guess whatever you want to call it, second generation Russian American. I'm born here, the son of immigrants, and I didn't grow up Shomer Shabbos. We grew up kind of traditional, I would say. So no forbidden animals. We didn't eat bacon or lobster or shrimp or anything like that. But, we'd go to McDonald's and think, okay, we get the chicken nuggets, we get the fries, we'll get a burger, we're not going to get bacon, like that. We thought we were keeping kosher. We also didn't eat meat and milk together. So in a Russian home, the borscht had no sour cream, We even had separate meat and milk dishes in the house. But when it comes to how long you wait after the meat, it was like, I don't know, just wait a little bit. Don't eat milk right away. So maybe 20 minutes or something, So we grew up traditional. And then, but I was going to yeshiva, like from kindergarten, we were living in Jersey City, which didn't really have a frum community. And my father would drive me to JC in Elizabeth. And around middle school or so, I asked to go to camp, the sleepaway camp, which was from Camp Dora Golding. And a lot of my friends were going there, and I really wanted to go. My parents kind of looked at the brochure. It looked pretty innocent, sports camp, activities, whatever. They didn't think I was going to get brainwashed there, maybe brainwashed in a good way. A lot of our brains need some good scrubbing,
Oh, absolutely.
So I went there, and I really bonded quickly with the other kids, with the division heads, with the counselors, and I came home starting to want to keep Shabbos, and at first my parents were kind of resistant to it. It didn't happen overnight. It probably took a good 2-3 years of like an evolution for us to get to be a fully from family, but I guess I kind of started it, and my parents at first were like not so happy about it. Then they said, okay, you could be from if you want, we won't be from, but we're not going to get in your way. So if you want to go have meals by from families on Shabbos, go for it. If you want to go to Shul Shabbos, go for it. If you don't want to watch TV on Shabbos, that's up to you. So I was like probably 13 years old around that time.
Wow.
So I was doing it, and then it got to the point where I guess they were like, all right, like he's always at other people's houses for Shabbos meals. Let us start doing Shabbos meals. And obviously I didn't want to do Shabbos meals in the home where like the TV was on. So I remember when my parents, it was like a turning point where they said, okay, we're not going to drive on Shabbos. We're not going to watch TV on Shabbos. Those two kind of isurim that they removed.
Right.
Now there's thousands of other halachos in Hilchos Shabbos, but those two things just created a completely different environment in the house. Yeah. You know what I mean? So, and then 2 more things happened. My father started coming with me to shul. And he's a very social guy. You've met my dad.
Oh, yeah.
So he started coming to shul. He immediately hit it off. Shul is Kiddush club, and there was some other Russian-speaking men and American guys, everybody, they really welcomed him with open arms, and that ended up parlaying into coming to shul daily, because they say, hey, I love seeing you on Shabbos, there's a shir Tuesday night, or why don't you come to this, or whatever. So he'd come, and and my mother started, what Jewish mother doesn't like having a family meal? So if you're not from, how often do you do that? I know we'd sit down. New Year's Eve is a big thing in Russian homes, So that was like a big, like a family dinner. We would do Pesach Seders, even Thanksgiving, not because my parents felt any special connection to Thanksgiving, but it was like an opportunity to have a family meal. So we did that, but that was it, a few times a year. Now she had this opportunity like every Shabbos. Now, our Shabbos meals didn't look like there was no kugel, there was no cholent. It was like Russian food, salat olivier and kotlety and, whatever, borscht, like Russian foods. But it was still a home-cooked, sit-down Shabbos meal. And then my mother started to learn how to make cholent, and it was maybe with a different spin on it,
It's amazing. Wow.
But yeah, she got into that, and then slowly everything kept evolving. Like even, let's say, after my parents are from for years, I could get a random call from them saying, what's the Erev Tafshilin, and how do I do it, or whatever, But, today they're both fully from Shomer Shabbos and kashrus and everything, and my father has chavrusas, and he has his Russian Sfarim, Russian Chumashim, Mikros Gedolos. He's got Russian art scroll, makes Russian Sidurim and things like that,
Wow.
So my friends would joke it's the topa, because they'd see this Russian chumash, and the English P is a Russian R.
Torah,
so like Torah,
right?
yeah. They're like got the topa there, but yeah, that's kind of my background religiously, and but at this point, I'm married 18 and a half years, and I've been from since I'm a young teenager. So generally when I meet other, people in the frum world, they can't tell that I didn't grow up from.
Right.
I guess it depends in what circle. If I'm in like a very Heimish circle in Borough Park or who knows what, then probably there they could tell that that I grew up more modern or whatever it is, but yeah, it's
Incredible. So you got married and you moved here straight to Highland Park, or were you?
No. So when we got married, I actually I was going to go into marketing and public relations. I majored in marketing in college, and I got an internship before my senior year at a PR firm. And I was going to do that full time, like for an entry level role right out of my senior year, which was nice. That my whole senior year I kind of didn't have to think about like, what am I going to do for a job after? Like that was my plan. I had accepted the position, whatever. But then on the side, I was kind of like a NCSY chapter advisor for Elizabeth, where we moved once we became from Elizabeth, New Jersey. So I had this relationship with like the NCSY higher ups in the OU. And at the time, there was also an organization called JSU. It might still exist. Jewish Student Union was specifically, catered to public school kids, running these Jewish culture clubs and Hebrew culture clubs in public schools, like after 3 p.m., after their day's over. So anyway, they recruited me pretty heavily. Like I interviewed in 5 cities.
Wow.
I think it was Teaneck, Silver Spring, Houston, Cleveland, and LA. Actually flew out to LA for like 3 days for an interview there, and Houston and Cleveland I interviewed remotely, and then Silver Spring I went down there, and Teaneck. And some of the cities actually made me an offer, some didn't. I ended up choosing Teaneck because it was just, I knew New Jersey well. Like that was the region where my wife and I had both grown up in. We actually both did NCSY also as teenagers.
Wow.
So so I worked full time as basically like a kiruv rabbi for 2 years right out of college, right out of YU. And it was a very home-based kind of job. It's very like 7 days a week. It's nights, it's Shabbosim, it's Yom Tovim, it's Purim you're on, Tisha B'Av you're on. It felt very, I just realized after like a couple years that I don't think it, makes sense long term for my family. I'm really happy I had that like epiphany.
Right.
I think Hashem sent me that thought, because I think sometimes in your early 20s, you don't make the wisest decisions, and you kind of don't have foresight. But I think sometimes like siyata d'shmaya, like Hashem just gives you these moments of clarity, So I got out of that, and basically I was looking to maybe go back into public relations and marketing, Meanwhile, my father-in-law had started a company maybe 10 years prior to that, and it was a pretty successful kitchen cabinet manufacturing, company. And he had, for years, kind of floated the idea of maybe me coming to work for him. And, at the time I was, let's say, still a student, getting married, and then I was going to go into marketing. And then I had the, kiruv job as like a rabbi. And it just never worked out. And this was an opportunity. Like I was looking to go back to the business world anyway. This had a lot of opportunity, and it was really an exciting option. So I went to work in choice cabinetry, and I really learned the business from the ground up. I got like a lot of good just business experience across. I learned some of the manufacturing technical stuff, like boots on the ground in the shop, and then I spent a lot of time out in the field. With installations and supervising that. So I really got a good, when you spend a lot of time in those like, multifamily high-rise apartments, you learn a little bit about all the trades, the HVAC, the electric, the plumbing, masonry, everything. So it gave me a good background of getting familiar with like the construction process, the sequence, the layouts and blueprints and all that kind of stuff. And I was there for 10 years,
Oh, wow.
The first couple of years it was factory installations. Then I started learning, the way the operations work in the office, the shipping and receiving, the purchasing, billing, estimating, hiring people and training them, and sales, and a little bit of everything, So I really got, over the next 8 years there, I got a lot of that good, well-rounded experience. And by the time I was done there, after 9.5 years, 10 years, I really felt like I had a good experience just overall business operations. And, that helped, prepare me for my next role. And, I, basically was contacted by some recruiters, and, there were some other opportunities out there. And, now thank God I work at this company called QFS. It stands for Quality Facility Solutions. Started out actually many years ago, called Quality Floortime, because back then, I think 25, 26 years ago, I think they just started out on some job sites, very small, modest operation. I think just cleaning like floors for like, after flooring companies would put in, let's say, hundreds of units worth of hardwood floors or other types of flooring, they'd come in and clean the floors. And then slowly the company evolved into doing all kinds of other cleaning, Now they rebranded Quality Floortime QFS to Quality Facility Solutions, because that's more broad, and it offers all kinds of, we offer security, concierge, obviously steady maintenance, which is I'm the director of operations for steady maintenance for a few states, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania. And basically steady maintenance is like when you go into, let's say, office buildings or medical facilities, like more or less after hours to clean while people aren't there. We also have some day cleaners that do stuff while people are there. But it really went into like all different trades. Like we have engineers that we hire for like large office buildings to do like the HVAC and handyman type stuff in the building. We even have some, snow removal and landscaping contracts. And we do nursing homes. We do a lot of Class A office buildings. We do urgent cares, medical facilities, schools, schools, like really across many different things. We could even do I think actually a couple malls, not in my division. And I know we've quoted like airports, so those are a little bit more tricky accounts to land, but we also have government, municipal facilities, police departments, government buildings, even prisons, like anything you can think of. One of the nice things about the cleaning industry is that AI is not going to replace it. It's going to enhance it. And we already see how it's doing that. That's maybe something we could get into later.
I was actually going to ask you about that. Like with AI exploding and everything, people are worried that in the next 3-4 years, you're going to have hundreds of millions of jobs gone. But in your profession, in your field, like you said, cleaning is not going anywhere.
Cleaning is like, there are certain industries that are just like, even in a recession or whatever, like everyone needs a place to live, Now during COVID, I think the business world realized that you could sort of also work where you live, and a lot of people just almost permanently stayed on either some hybrid model or like totally work from home Zoom model or whatever it is. So it also reduces, I guess, the carbon footprint on the world. It's like, why do you need a place to live and then a place to work, and then you need something that's going to take you from where you live to where you work, and we call that a car, and like all these different spaces, but like, you could do everything in less, in one space. But AI is definitely, I think, going to change the industry. First of all, I get contacted constantly by robotics companies that offer all kinds of, they're not cheap. They're like tens of thousands, could be sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars. But we're talking like these robots. They don't look like a robot like you and me with like a body. So it's not a robot, humanoid, freestanding man sweeping, right? But they look more like, trying to think of it, almost like, we've seen Roombas for years.
Yeah.
But imagine like bigger versions of that really can have like multiple tanks of water for clean water, for dirty water, and it could do all different things. It could sweep, it could use heat and steam and mop, and you can program them, and they do have AI involved where it really learns where foot traffic is, and places that are less dirty, it'll go there less often, places that are more dirty, it'll go there more often, but you still need humans to like deal with them, to troubleshoot them, to reload them, to program them, to supervise them, and then they have huge ones that hold even more water for bigger facilities that are wider, that can cover more square feet per hour. And then there's things like you could set up like even, let's say, a restroom with, don't worry, not cameras or anything like that, but like sensors. And if you give it like a few weeks, it will basically learn like which stalls get more activity, which stalls need to be refilled more often, with consumables, with toilet paper, which liquid soap, hand dispensers are getting more activity, like all these things. So it'll give you data, you know what I mean? So it's unbelievable. And let's say you also have like certain office spaces with, could be dozens or hundreds of cubicles, but very few people come in on a daily basis. But as a cleaner, you don't know exactly which, cubicle actually had. So there's the old school ways where there's like a card,
right?
But that leaves some, human error, place for human error. There are like sensors that you could put just like under the desk, a little sticker, and it links to an app, and then a cleaner could pull up a tablet and see a whole layout, a whole grid of the whole space, and it'll know, was the conference room used today? Some days it is, some days it isn't. Some days it's used and there's a ton of food, crumbs left over because they had lunch at the meeting. Some days maybe they didn't, you know what I mean? So it tells you everything,
That's fascinating.
And I would say most cleaning companies are not yet utilizing this, but it is fascinating because if you are in a cleaning company, you have to ask yourself well, if I'm not an early adopter, my competitors will be. You know what I mean? And I don't want to be last. You know what I mean? So it's something we talk about like in our innovation meetings and things like that, to see how we could constantly improve and provide a better, not to mention, I didn't even get into the green aspect of it, right? I mean, if you use AI to minimize, how many hours you have to use energy from a vacuuming, or how many, of the products you need to use, the chemicals, whatever it is. So it's also better for the environment, right? You know, if you're just, doing less with more, working smarter, more efficiently, so it definitely has capability for green, for green and stuff like that also. Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah. So I'm just curious, from your experience at QFS and beyond, can you share some lessons or experiences that translated to, there's something you mentioned earlier, you were involved as a kiruv rabbi, you were working for your father-in-law in the, was it the cabinet business?
Yes.
So it's fascinating to me that to see a lot of the Baal Tshuvas, I would say just the firm people in general, very much involved in kiruv and yeshivas and fundraising. It's incredible. What can you share? The first question that I had for you was, what's your driving force to kind of like want you to be in those areas? to get involved in organizations, to get involved in Shari Tzion, to do all these things?
Right. So that's a great question. I mean, look, one of the reasons I got into Kiruv was I really felt like, because I was on the receiving end of it,
right.
I want to give back. I also felt like I can really relate to a lot of the kids coming from a non-frum background, particularly in New Jersey. Like there were so many public schools I'd go to, Fair Lawn area, etc. They have like a lot of kids just like me. They have Russian parents, they're American. It's almost like a kid like that is almost like ripe for Kiruv, because their parents often don't really have an aversion to like Orthodox Judaism. In fact, when they think of a rabbi or they think of Judaism, they think of the Orthodox version. They say, I'm just not Orthodox. They don't have some strong connection, let's say, to like Reform Judaism or Conservative Judaism, usually the Russian homes, So a little bit I felt like I wanted to give back, and then even when I got out of Kiruv professionally, I stayed involved for many years, and I'm still involved in some college campus Kiruv stuff. So now, because thank God I have 6 kids, and career as you go on just keeps getting higher stakes, more stress, more time consuming, so I have less time, like disposable time every week to be involved having like chavrusas with college kids. But like going back, let's say 10 years ago, I was like really in the thick of it. Like I went on trips to Israel, birthright trips. I staffed, and I come back here to campus. When you go on these trips, you really have like accelerated relationships. It's only 10 days, but you come back, feel like you know these kids for years. So it's very easy to set up times to learn with them, go grab a slice of kosher pizza with them or whatever it is. So I always wanted to, give back. I think that was always a driving force. But further than that, I think like by personality, I always want to be building, So even if you're working for somebody and it's not your own business and, you're a salaried employee, but, in what you do, even if it's operations, right? I'm not technically in sales in what I do, but there's always new, like, levels you could reach, whether it's in your efficiency or your level of customer service, or rolling out new programs like professional training for my team, whatever it is. Like every year you try to set goals and hit them. And, because I have this kind of, I think,
drive.
Yeah, it's like a drive to always be trying new things and doing different things. So, so that can translate into things in the nonprofit world and volunteer work, whether it's like chairing dinners and being involved in that. I remember someone approached me. I used to be, a runner many, many years ago, a long distance runner. And I had a friend that I ran with a lot, and he was very involved in Lifeline and doing some of the races. He's like, you should do it. And I was like, I don't know. He's like, look, it's running and it's also fundraising. It's 2 different things, but I think you'd be good at both. And I said, I don't know. And he's like, just try it. What's the worst that'll happen? Yeah. Remember, when you're fundraising for a nonprofit, you're calling someone up and asking them to remove money from their pocket and put it somewhere else. So yes, the initial feeling is uncomfortable, right? But you have to remind yourself, like, you're not putting it in your pocket. You're not asking for money for yourself. You know what I mean? You're doing a service, for an organization, So so I got very into that, and something I kind of realized that connected all these things. Whether you're in sales or not, you're always selling. You know what I mean? So like when I was in Kiruv, I was always selling like in few ways. Number one, I was always selling God. So I would have debates with kids who say, I'm an atheist, I'm an agnostic, or whatever, you know what I mean? And I had to learn Richard Dawkins and Christian theology and Islam and everything, you know what I mean? So I'm prepared, to debate some of these people. But I was always selling God. And then I was also fundraising, when I was working as a Kiruv rabbi. And I was always selling these students on going to the next Shabbaton. If they already come to Shabbatons, I'm trying to get them to go to a summer camp. Because this is how you like advance the growth. Yeah. Really, it starts, let's say, even from the public school level, where they're just coming to the public school clubs, and there's not so much selling there. You're just trying to expose them to like some positive things in Judaism they're not aware of. Not getting into so much of what's forbidden, but more about like what do we do, in the holidays and in our day-to-day life, the beauty of the religion and whatever. But then it was like, okay, Tuesday nights we have this, get together in a Starbucks where, we get some drinks and we talk about Judaism a little deeper, Right. So that's already like a frum program. It's outside of the public school. There they meet some yeshiva kids, and that's actually some yeshiva kids are kind of unfortunately jaded or uninspired, one of the only ways to reach them is to kind of introduce them to some totally secular public school kids who are looking to grow. And for the first time, this yeshiva kid is like exposed to like a new reality where they can kind of be empowered to be like a leader and like an educator, and they could show them what page we're on in the sitter and explain to them, oh, right now we're doing this or we do this, So anyway, then you keep advancing. So you're always selling there. I mean, you keep advancing them, trying to get to the next thing. And then, like right now I'm in operations,
Right.
but sometimes people joke that the best sales is operations, right? Because first of all, referrals, if you do a really good job at keeping a client happy, they're going to talk, right? They know people, they have colleagues in the industry. They're going to talk and they're going to recommend you, to other companies. And then sometimes they're so happy with whatever base level service you're providing for them, they want to sign up for additional services, upsells, one-time contracts, one-offs, things like that. So I feel like no matter what you're doing, you're always selling. Like some people say, they talk about like what industry would I tell my kid to go into?
Yeah.
So sometimes people, historically, people would say, get a good education, get a good profession, learn a skill. So let's say if you're a dentist or if you're a doctor, you'll always have job security, blah, blah, blah. But then you have people, let's say from the more Heimish world who are not familiar with that, they say, what are you talking about? Why should I just trade my time for money? Let me be an entrepreneur, start businesses and grow them and scale them and then delegate and keep like diversifying and have more investments. And, that's really like the sky's the limit.
Right.
As a dentist, you can make a good living, but you're going to max out at a certain level. But what I think people forget is that, a lot of successful doctors and dentists are also entrepreneurs. They could also scale. They could also hire doctors to work under them. They could open, more offices or branches or whatever it is. So that's the thing. It's like no matter what you do, you could say like, I don't want to be in sales, so I'll become a radiologist. I'll sit in a dark room and just stare at a thing. It's like, okay, you could do that, But then one day if you wake up, you say, oh, I'm a radiologist, but maybe I become an interventional radiologist. I could do procedures. I could put in stents. I could treat varicose veins, whatever. I could open up a vein center. I could be a partner in an urgent care, as a side thing.
Wow.
And work there one day a week, but have equity, but once you do that, now you're an entrepreneur. Right. You have to figure out, how am I getting patients? Am I utilizing social media? What am I doing? How do I do sales? So I feel like anything you do is going to have that. You have to market yourself, and you always have that component. So I think all these things are all sort of connected. I mean?
Love that.
Yeah.
I love the way you think. I love how broad you think and how you're able to take the details and to everything. And that brings me to my next question in terms of, Yossi, you've worn so many hats, and we've discussed and touched on a few of them. You've managed teams, clients, and I feel like large community initiatives. How do you keep people that you're working with motivated and aligned, when challenges hit?
Right, 100%.
You mentioned fundraising, and I know that we've spoken about it in the past. Fundraising is something that I think we all do in different areas to help other organizations. How do you motivate other individuals when challenges arise?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. Also, to me, and this is something I think about very consciously, it's about balance, and I'll explain what I mean. So this is also, I think, something that fundraising has in common with like leading teams. I forgot what the phrase is, but there's some concept even I think in like chinuch also, like you have to know how to, we have two arms, we have two pockets in our pants, you have to know how to sometimes push with one hand and draw back in with the other hand at the same time. You know what I mean? I find that, there's a lot of, and that requires a definite like level of emotional intelligence, and to have like empathy and to really understand, to sense early, to to sense which way the wind's blowing in general.
Wow.
Not just, let's say, in the stock market, right? But you're talking about when you're dealing with people. So if you are a manager in the business world and you have, let's say, 4 or 5 or 6 direct reports, or 3, whatever it is, right? And you're trying to motivate them and have them hit certain goals. Now, you always have to push, because the nature of people is they get complacent and, so you always have to push, but you have to know how to, push without breaking someone. I find this is a good art also in very successful high schools, yeshivas. Some places are very nervous to push the kids because God forbid we push them too far. You don't want them chas shalom go off the derech, get turned off, get resentful. But at the same time, if you don't push at all and you're two hands off, you just end up, the goal is for a boy to come in 9th grade. He's a boy. He might be bar mitzvah, but he's a boy. And the goal is when he leaves, when he's 18 years old and he's graduate high school, to be a young man. That's the most crucial, transformative 4 years you could claim in a person's life, in their adolescence. How do you do that? It's not going to happen without, growth happens from pushing someone past their comfort zone. You ever hear this famous mashal? I don't know where it's from. It might be from some ancient Japan. I think it was in some show also. But, they say that, if you see a butterfly struggling to get out of a cocoon, a young child might come over and feel bad for it. He doesn't understand. He doesn't have the wisdom. So he may take a pair of scissors, very carefully cut the cocoon.
Oh,
and then the butterfly, it's free. So it falls out and it lands on the ground and it flutters its wings and it flies away. It's like, great. But then it sees after like 30 seconds, it like starts to, lose its engines and fall to the ground, and it shrivels up and dies.
Wow.
And this old man sees this and the boy's crying. And, and the boy's like, I don't understand. I just helped the cocoon. I just helped the butterfly, cut him out of the cocoon. And the old man says, what you don't realize is it's struggling, right? And it looks, and you feel bad for it. You want to help it, but you don't realize that it's through that struggle that it's going to gain the strength, whatever muscles, I don't know the anatomy of a butterfly, right? But whatever structure, systems it has in itself, that it's going to be able to live as an adult, So, but again, it all boils down to balance, right? If that cocoon is too tight and it can't get out ever, it won't have a successful life. And obviously Hashem with a cocoon, this is just Hashem set up a system in Teva where that's what he does for every butterfly, So it's the same thing in high schools. It's the same thing when you're managing people, and it's the same thing with fundraising. Like, some people don't get it. I think maybe they're too aggressive with fundraising and they don't understand where to back off or where you're not going to alienate somebody. But most people have the other problem with fundraising is they don't realize they could actually push harder than they do. They don't realize that you could actually reach out to someone you haven't spoken. You think, I haven't spoken to him in years. He's going to be so insulted. I don't talk to you for years and I reach out when I want money. It's like, again, it's not for you. You'd be surprised how many people, I have friends who are Rebbeim and when I reach out to them, they'll donate more than the Gvir who's constantly getting, requests for donations because first of all, because, this guy he feels like a mensch. He's like, I have a job, I make money, I'm not wealthy, but I could donate something. And they want to give tzedakah, from Rebbe. He knows the power of tzedakah. He's a from guy, you know what I mean? So you'd be surprised if you just take the shyness out of the equation, have the courage, but it's balance. It's learning how to push without breaking, without snapping, and at the same time, that's the same thing with managing people. You want to have a good environment, a good atmosphere, a good morale, reduce turnover, and also just from a human place, like. You want people to go home, everyone's got their families and people they love, people that love them. You want them to go home, feel good about their work, understand as a manager that, there are things in life much more important than what you do for a living.
Right.
So, even though you spend the majority of your, working, like waking hours at work, so you could argue like, what do you mean? 80% of my life is my work. But if your mentality at work is, why am I doing this? I'm doing this for Hashem, really, for my family, because, it's what Hashem wants me to have a family and that costs money, you know what I mean? And I have to support the family, and and I have to do this, So if you have that right mentality, and I always say attitude reflects leadership. So it's a trickle down system from the owner to the CEO to the COO and to all the directors of operation, and under them, their managers, and eventually people working in the field. But if everybody tries to instill their values into the people that report to them, then that'll translate into a good culture. You know what I mean? So the point is the same outlook I have towards, perspective and work-life balance and all these things, I try to show that to the people that report to me. And in that way, you motivate your team, you push them, you set goals, you try and crush them, and and meet your objectives and KPIs and all these things. But you try to do it in a way that's healthy, and really maintains, and that's what keeps people. Otherwise, people could quote unquote suffer through something for like a finite amount of time. Like, let's say you're a resident, a doctor, med school, whatever, but it's not like going to be like that for 20, 30 years. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, so you see that in some workplaces. It's like, yes, you can push people like crazy, but then they will burn out. Some people faster than others, but everyone has a limit, and then some people, maybe they won't burn out to the extent that they quit or whatever, but if they walk around with like a bad taste in their mouth and they're resentful, then you're not getting optimal productivity and efficiency and production and results out of that person either than if they had, they had a good feeling. They walked around with a good feeling. So again, it's that balance, it's that pushing while still pulling at the same time, and wearing the different, keeping the different roles, so to speak, the different attitudes simultaneously in your pockets, so to speak. I think it boils down to that.
And leading by example, like you do.
Yeah. I try my best.
Yossi, can you share some stories of success and struggles that you faced? It could be in your life, it could be in your work life, it could be just in general, things that you're open to sharing.
Yeah, I mean, something that's, for better, for worse, a big part of my life is struggling with just keeping health and, that connection to weight loss and food and just the social life, you know what I mean? It's all connected. And look, I consider myself, very blessed in that, thank God, like Baruch Hashem, like that's, to me, there are people facing much bigger hardships than having to watch what they eat. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
But for me, if you're sort of someone who's like in your head a lot and your thoughts are, you have very strong thoughts, you know what I mean? So, food can be a big obstacle, you know what I mean? And, at the beginning when you're in your 20s, it's maybe just about, aesthetics. Well, I want to look better, so I want to lose weight. But as you get older, I turned 40 this year. So,
wow.
So having extra weight really just carries into like health issues, and when you really get into your head and you say, well, I have a family, how could I not do this for them? Am I really as good a father and a husband as I think I am if I can't just say no to dessert to get an extra 10, 20 years out of my life? You know what I mean? To leave this earth when you're 85 is a lot different than when you're 65. In those 20 years, you could, Mitzvah Hashem, partake in a lot of family simchas and not just meet your grandkids, but dance at their weddings and see them raise their families and, and so on, so it's definitely something that's, a big part of my life. I've peaked at very high weights where I was very unhealthy, and and it would just impact my life with so many things. And I've had time periods like about 12 years ago, I lost a lot of weight in like a very mainstream healthy way. It wasn't through any crazy plan. I was just eating super clean, being super consistent with exercise, strength training, cardio, everything. And I got down to a very healthy weight, and I had a very athletic lifestyle. I was running many times a week, lots of mileage, getting stronger in the gym. And that really was almost like its own social life. You know what I mean?
Wow.
So, and yeah, look, to me, it all kind of ties into everything, right? Because if you feel like you have the discipline to be healthy and hit your fitness goals and your dieting, and when I say dieting, I don't mean eating less. I mean just having a healthy diet.
Mindful eating.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're able to do that, then you gain more confidence to do that, to be disciplined and successful in the business world. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it's a struggle, It's like I thought back then, like I kept the weight off for a few years. And for a few years, I was very much in this world where even if I gained back a few pounds, I wouldn't gain more. So I thought, past that, because, if I went 2-3 days without running, I would have this like feeling of lacking. I was like, I had this like the endorphins, the runner's high, whatever you want to call it, where I would just feel very lethargic if I didn't run for a few days. So I thought I was safe. Like I gave away all my big clothes. Like I thought like I would never gain back all the weight. And you go from 2 or 3 kids to having 5, 6, and again more stress at work, more obligations with the community life. I started chaverim like 7-8 years ago in this town. We could get into that a little bit if you want later. So all these things just take up time. You have less time to, focus on yourself. And it's just slowly, 1 pound at a time, it all came back. And then you kind of like, it's like one of those things, like it just sneaks up on you, and you're like, how could 100 pounds back sneak up on you? Well, because the first 20 you say, oh, it's the same as not gaining anything because I could go right back quickly. And, and then it's like another 10, I'm like, another 20, you're like, well, I'm not that far from being only up 15-20 pounds. Like I'm sure I could get there. And you're still like running, you're just slower. You're running 10-minute miles, 11-minute miles instead of 8-minute miles, or whatever. Right. And you're still doing the races. So you still feel like an athlete, like, oh, I could still do everything, just not as fast, but who cares? There's not the Olympics, So you kind of convince yourself that you're only up 30-40 pounds and you're still so much lower than you were when you started. So you're like, oh, well, I'm sure that's to be expected, right? If you lose over 100 pounds, you're going to gain back 30-40%. That's a win because the data shows over 60% of people gain back over 60% of the weight. You know what I mean? And only like a few, like I would say from the people I've met in my life that have lost like giant amounts of weight, like huge amounts of weight, like maybe 5% or less keep it all off for over 10 years. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Because it's only a matter of time. Like your body is like itching, they say like you don't eliminate the fat cells, you just shrink them.
Wow.
So whatever amount of billions, trillions of fat cells you have, you'll have them for life without some kind of surgery or something, right? So those cells are always looking to expand back to whatever your biggest was, right? So if you're a 180-pound man and you've never crossed 180 pounds, it's going to be a lot easier for you to stay 180 pounds than somebody that was 280 and went down to 180.
Wow.
Because his body's going to be trying to get back to where it was. Now, it's doable. It's like, hey, some things are hard in life. So like that guy who's never crossed 180 pounds, he's going to be able to have dessert every Shabbos. You, maybe not. Maybe less often. Maybe a smaller piece. Maybe only fruit. Whatever. Right. You can't have, you don't have to be sentenced to a life of zero indulging fun treats, whatever it is. But unfortunately, like you did this to yourself. Now you'll have to pay the consequences for life to some extent. You know what I mean?
Somebody's watching this and is thinking, I feel like a lot of people are struggling with weight. It's a big issue. I feel like maybe half of the frum world, I don't know, maybe 40% of the frum world is struggling with this. If someone's watching and saying, I've tried diets, I've tried everything, but I gain it all back, or they're gaining it all back. What's your take on? I've had some coworkers that are trying to do the shots. Do you find that works for people, or?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, look, right now, so like I said, there's like a lifelong journey, right?
Yeah.
Right now, I'm actually down 40 pounds from my peak, which is great. Like I went from XXL to extra large. So I'm already down a size. I feel better. It's easier for me to exercise than it was 40 pounds ago. But I still feel I have a long way to go. Right. And I'm working on it. I actually tried getting my hands on the shots, like in the summer, like a couple months ago. And my insurance kept denying it. Believe it or not, my blood work wasn't quite bad enough.
Okay, good.
According to, well, that's kind of what I eventually said. I tried 2 different doctor's offices and resubmitting to insurance, appealing this, that. I got a positive diagnosis for sleep apnea. We tried from that side, like all these different things, and I kept getting denied. And I said to myself, well, if the insurance company thinks it's not that bad yet, they probably think, well, like, leave us alone. Like, you could go do it yourself.
Right.
You're young enough or small enough that you could do it yourself.
Right.
So I didn't think I could, but I'm trying again now. For the 100th time, and thank God now I'm having some success. What advice I would give to people? I mean, first of all, like, pray. Like daven. Because sometimes I feel like there's no rhyme or reason with these things, and it's just like you have to chalk it up to like God. You know what I mean? Like, you could be trying to sometimes, let's say, get along with somebody, and it's the harder you try, the less it's going, and then one day, all of a sudden, chemistry, gets better,
right?
And all of a sudden, and it's like there's nothing.
There's no rhyme or
reason. There's no
to
rational way to explain it. It just happens, sometimes, I think God obviously is responsible, and it's the same thing with weight loss. Like, you could tell somebody in your life all you want. You meet some people who are super fit, and they have, let's say, a spouse or a child or whatever it is who's like very heavy, and you think to yourself, like, how can this be? And the reality is there's nothing you can tell someone. They have to decide for themselves, and it just boils down to, you have to honestly ask yourself if the negatives of being overweight outweigh the negatives of dieting or exercising or whatever, right? So I personally believe, like, white knuckling it, just basically like trying to just have raw willpower thrown at the problem, it doesn't work long term.
Right.
It doesn't work long term because we live in a society and a culture where there's so much just good food constantly available, and we're just biologically wired, like, sharks eat what they eat in the water, right? But if you dropped like cheeseburgers into the water, they'd eat that because there's way more calories in this amount of cheeseburger than in this amount of tuna.
Right.
But they don't have cheeseburgers. They only have the tuna. So they're chasing tuna all day. So that's why they don't get overweight. But if they just had, like, if they could pull up to a building and they give them like $10 or $8, and then they would out the window hand them 8 cheeseburgers, they would do that. You know what I mean? So that's why, like, forget just from world, even just out in society, there's like so many people that are overweight. You know what I mean? Because it's just so easy. So if you're just going to, like, say, oh, I'm just going to willpower,
right,
your science will win eventually, like, more times than not. And you'll just, like, you may lose a little, but then it's only a matter of time. I think the only way is if you honestly just realize, you're like, well, it feels good to eat like fried chicken every night for dinner, but it also feels good to, like, tie my shoes and not be out of breath after. You know what I mean?
Right.
Meaning, like, yeah, when I'm hungry at 4 p.m., there's some discomfort in those hunger pangs. And normally, like, let's say I'd eat something right away and then not have an appetite for dinner. And then my wife made dinner, so I'm going to eat that too.
Right.
Or whatever. But if you say, like, no, I'm going to be uncomfortable at 4 p.m., I will wait for dinner. I will be hungry for a few hours, 2-3 hours until I eat dinner. And I will sacrifice that discomfort. And you say to yourself, okay, that's a moderate amount of discomfort. What's much bigger discomfort is, let's say, being so heavy that you go on a casual hike with, like, family, with little kids, with 60-year-olds, with your in-laws, whatever. You go for a casual hike and everyone's doing fine, and you're, like, panicking because you're, like, your heart's racing, you're nervous you might have a heart attack. You know what I mean?
Wow.
So if you try to, like, have perspective and you weigh things, then it's no longer a willpower issue because this is what you prefer. The same way you like physically how something good tasting feels, you also like physically how it feels to have no pain.
So you
know
choose
what I mean?
your heart. You really have to choose.
Exactly. You know what I'm saying? So I just think, like, that's a huge thing. You know what I mean? It's like, do you like when your knee hurts? You don't. For some people, the difference between being 195 pounds and 180 pounds. Literally, the knee pain turns on after they cross one night. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you want to get on the elliptical, you're like, well, my knee hurts. It's like, well, your knee's doing its best at this weight. Like, it was designed for a healthy weight. Your bones, like, as you get heavier, they don't grow bigger. They might actually get stronger and have better bone density from the weight load. But you have all these other metabolic problems from the weight load. You can create weight load on your bones to strengthen them through strength training. You know what I'm saying?
It's true.
And strengthen your bones that way long term. But it's like you said, it's choosing your hard. And I would say that's the biggest thing, to kind of just really think. It's I think that's huge.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Do you think that the food today is just designed to be more addicting and more?
Oh, absolutely. There's this book called Salt, Sugar, Fat, written by, I forgot his name. He's like a journalist. And he did like this big investigative, he does this for a living, right? So he went into like large food manufacturing companies. You have to remember, like, an Oreo is the world's most successful cookie. I think it's in the Guinness Book of World Records. There's been more Oreos made and consumed than any other cookie in history.
Wow.
That might include people's homemade chocolate chip cookies. I don't know, but certainly commercially that are sold, for money, for profit. Now, does an Oreo look anything? It's an Oreo cookie, but does it look anything like an actual cookie? That people know, right? If you bake in your house some kind of, some carbs, some crackers, whatever, does it look like a Ritz cracker? I mean, these are not foods. They're really not. They're food-like products, and they're not cooked. They're manufactured. Wow. Like when your wife or mother or whatever makes something for you, it could be high in fat, it could be fried, but it's made small batch for you. It's made with love. It's made for in the home family model. It's not made to be maximal, to be addictive in the most maximum form. It's not made to turn a profit. In these food manufacturing companies, they're not making it in a kitchen like your mother, your wife. They're making it in a factory, and they basically look for things called the bliss point, the mouth feel. They have these terms in their industry. So they'll actually do focus groups, right? They'll have 5 rooms with 5 groups of children, and they'll have them sample prototypes for the Oreo. And they want it at a very specific level of sweetness, because not sweet enough, and you don't want to have a million of them. No one sits down and eats 8 apples.
Right.
Why? Because apple's sweet, but it's not as sweet as an Oreo, you know what I mean, per ounce, right? Now, they don't want it too sweet either. Why? Because if you've ever had a piece of baklava or like very rich piece of chocolate or very rich brownie, you have one piece and you are done. You're like, this is so rich, it's delicious, but I can't sit and have 10 pieces of this. You're so thirsty after you chug like 2 glasses of water. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
you have a spoonful of honey. It's very, very decadent. You want a cup of water after that fills you up. No, they are looking to make things that are going to be like the most addictive as possible, where it's not too sweet, it's sweet enough, it's not too sweet. It's going to have you going back for more and more and more. They did this experiment with mice. Mice and rats, they're prey animals, which means they're wired. Hashem made them to fear big, open, well-lit spaces, because that's where they're vulnerable.
Right.
When they're out in a forest is generally in the shade. There's a big open area. They are super vulnerable there. These hawks, it's like watch you like a hawk. Why? Hawks have great eyesight, right? So a hawk from 300 feet, a falcon from 300 feet will spot a little mouse moving, and it'll head down there faster, right? I think you drop a bowling ball or a shoe or anything from a building, it's going to max out at 132 miles an hour. It's pretty fast.
Wow.
I think a falcon somehow through flying down can actually reach speeds of 200 miles an hour or faster.
Wow.
So that's how it hunts. It'll hit another bird. So you're talking, these animals, these little rodents are very vulnerable, a rabbit, whatever. They like closed, confined, small, dark spaces. So that's why, mice, that's what they do. You rarely in broad daylight will see a mouse or a rat scurry, even in some disgusting place, Now, they did an experiment where they fed these mice and rats Oreos for like a week, every day. And when they would put a piece of cheese in the middle of a well-lit, cold, empty, large kitchen, in the middle of the kitchen floor, the mice, the rat wouldn't go get the cheese. They're too scared.
Wow.
But then they started doing it with Oreos, and they went every time. They were willing to risk their life to get the Oreo. That's how addicting processed sugar is. And everything's like that. Anytime you process something, it's going to get more addictive, right? I mean, I believe the opium or whatever is in poppy seeds. It's not processed, so you don't get addicted to everything bagel. You might get addicted because of the bagel, but not because of the poppy seeds, right? No one's addicted to, poppy cookish cake or whatever it is,
Right.
because of the poppy. You might be addicted because there's a lot of sugar in it, But once you process opium and it becomes heroin or cocaine, I don't even know, then it becomes highly addictive because it's processed,
Wow.
So definitely the odds are stacked against us. It's a difficult, that's why one of the ways, if people have specific advice, they go to a nutritionist. It's helpful, right? But ultimately, some good guidelines are if 85% of what you eat are like whole foods, it had a mom or a dad, grew in the ground or on a tree, didn't come in a bag or a box, you'll be in pretty good shape. You know what I mean? If you start out your day eating eggs, fruit, things like that, and then for lunch you're having either fish or chicken or even some meat, you know what I mean? And again, some veggies, even potatoes, rice, things like that. If you just eat like that, you probably won't get like obese. Maybe if you eat too many potatoes, too much rice, and you don't fry, even if you don't fry them, like you may get a little overweight, but you won't be like huge. I really am like a firm believer, like, people say like, oh, bananas high in sugar. It's like nobody's 400 pounds because they ate too many bananas.
Right.
They're just not, They might also eat bananas, maybe in the ice cream or on a cereal or whatever it is. But, but that's, 100%. It's
So
it's
one
very
thing
tough.
I learned very recently, and I'll share with you, I don't know if you're aware of this, that lack of sleep, what happens if we sleep 5 hours versus 7 to 8 hours a night, what happens is we make wrong food choices because we're not thinking clearly. We have these cravings. The body really should be resting and rejuvenating and healing, but we're not giving it enough of that. So it's like missing something. So it goes for something that is sugary, addicting.
Absolutely. Oh, like huge. I mean, sleep, I would say there's probably half a dozen reasons why sleep is important for like not being heavy. You know what I'm saying? Obviously for your health, it's important in general.
Right.
But first of all, the more time you're sleeping, the less time you're eating.
It's true.
Right? So if you're getting 4 hours a night, when are those 4 hours? Let's say from 2 to 6.
You're just processing what you ate.
Now,
basically.
that means you're up till 2 in the morning. So of course you're going to be hungry at midnight. You ate dinner 6 hours ago, 5 hours ago. You're more likely. Now, if you go to sleep at 11, so if you're hungry at 10, you're like, you know what, I'm going to sleep in an hour. I'm not going to eat now.
Right.
You know what I mean? But like by the time it's 12, you haven't eaten in many hours. You're starving. Now you have midnight snack. There's an extra meal. So that's number one. Number two, I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't know the medical terms, but apparently there are some sort of hormones or something that, help you with appetite, suppressing appetite. And when you sleep, those hormones function correctly. Your body makes enough of them. When you don't sleep enough, you don't. And in fact, the other hormones that crave, like the hunger hormones spike. You know what I mean? So you get less sleep, you're hungrier. I also find that, and I'm not the only one who thinks this, I heard a million people, say this, that they had a similar experience. When you sleep less, think about it, you're more fatigued during the day.
Right.
What's going to give you energy? Now, caffeine will do it, but carbs will do it too. You know what I'm saying? Just like a cookie, something small, a sucking candy, I don't know, something.
Yeah.
But you're like always reaching for something, for that quick little sugar rush. You'll have a lot of energy for the next 10, 15, 30 minutes, and then maybe even an hour. But then after a couple hours, it goes back. Now it's time for another snack.
Right.
Now you're eating throughout the day. You know what I mean? If you get enough sleep, you can go, and it's like actual good restful sleep. the whole day, you're like amazed. I can go the whole day without getting sleepy at all. The whole time I'm working, I'm focused. It's like, I started using a CPAP machine a couple months ago. Like totally changed my life.
Wow.
Crazy. I did the sleep study. The doctor was like super concerned. He was like, these are like Hall of Fame numbers here, like in a bad way. Like I've never seen this bad. Like
wow.
How many times per minute you're stopping to breathe, not good. What your oxygen levels are. Like your brain needs oxygen to do everything, you know? So it was like a miracle. Thank God that I haven't, like had a heart attack or a stroke or anything like that, because my brain was getting so little oxygen while I sleep because I'd stopped breathing. Because you basically like, I don't know what happens, like your tongue rolls back and blocks your airway. It's like a whole thing. So when you use a CPAP machine, it pushes air into you, into your nose and mouth. Mine is both. And it keeps your airway open. So you're talking from going from like 89 instances per hour where you stop breathing, so it's like more than once time per minute, to like 4 or 5 times. Wow. It's like a drastic reduction. It's like, I find like I could drive for 2 hours on a random weekday if I'm visiting a client or whatever it is, not get sleepy. I could sit down and watch an entire movie and not get sleepy. I could work on my desk for many hours straight and not get tired, Wow. So it like really changed my life. And that hopefully helps with other things. You're trying to do workouts, right? If you're so sleepy you could barely sit at your desk longer than 2 hours without getting up and walking around, or you can't even, drive for longer than 30 minutes without getting sleepy. How do you plan to do a workout? You know what I mean? So, so 100% the sleep is huge. It's crucial. Wow. So it really helps. And also I think it just lends itself, like if you're the type of person who starts developing that mindset of being disciplined, you're like, okay, so I'll be on the phone less at night, wasting time. I'll just get more sleep, or like, or whatever it is, it just lends itself to you being more productive. You're like, okay, I'm in discipline mode. So I'm going to be disciplined about sleep. I'm going to be disciplined about what I eat. I'm going to be disciplined about, how I maximize my time if I'm trying to do the DAF or whatever it is. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it just helps get you in that like disciplined mindset. So it definitely helps, I think, with diet and food and weight loss and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. Reflecting back, you've been married for 18 and a half years. Thank God, Ken and Hari, you have 6 beautiful children. You've been really heavily involved in your community in Edison. Looking back, can you share things I've already mentioned a lot of things. These are things that you're proud of, but what are some, what's a proud moment where you felt you made a real difference in someone's life, in an organization, in somebody's life in Kiruv, or in somebody's life in your own personal life in the community?
It's funny you asked that. Very recently, someone reached out to me, literally yesterday. I'm not going to say the person's name. Someone in the community, because I don't think they'd mind, but only because I didn't get their permission. But it doesn't really matter who it is. What matters is the story. He literally texted me yesterday. He's like, Rosh Hashanah just went by, and Rosh Hashanah is a time where we kind of reflect. He's like, I've been meaning to tell you something for the past 2 years, and I always wanted to tell you in person, but whenever I'd see you, it wasn't like the right moment. So I thought it's better I text you than just not say it at all. He said, I lost my father 2 years ago. Wow. And I remember you came to the funeral, and I was a little surprised to see you there. Because I didn't know who would come. It's the middle of the day, it was far, whatever, and and then at the Shiva, you also, were at the Shiva, and you said something to me that probably at the time to you was like a really innocuous comment, like not something you really thought about, but it was by far the most comforting and meaningful thing anyone said to me from when he passed away, through the funeral, through the whole Shiva. And all I told him was, I don't even remember saying this, but he said it to me in the text. He said that, he said that he was sad during the Shiva, which obviously makes sense, and he was really emotional and missed his father a lot, and they had a great relationship. And I said, and I said to him that it's hagufa, meaning this specifically, that you're so sad means that, think about it, somebody who didn't have, unfortunately, God forbid, a good relationship with their parents for the last 20, 30 years of their adult life or whatever it is, and they were kind of estranged. Maybe they're not so emotional and they're not taking it so hard. So I said it's very clear that thank God you had however many years, 55 years, whatever it is, with your father. That's a long time where you had a really good run, with your dad, and that'll never leave. Like, he's physically gone, but like those memories from your earliest childhood memories from when you're 4 or 5 years old, all the way through all your adolescent years, where obviously your dad is very, hopefully involved in your life, and even your adult years where you're busy and you have your own family, but you continue this connection. Like, just try to have comfort looking back on those times. That's all I said, because I'm sitting in the Shiva house.
Wow.
And what else am I going to do? I'm sitting there for 45 minutes, so I'm schmoozing with him. And the fact that, he remembered that and it had that impact on him, that 2 years later he sent me this whole long text, saying this, was so meaningful to me. And, that's a one-on-one human interaction, that's a small scale. It's a micro thing, right? It's not a organization. It's not something that affects a large group of people. It's not even something that's like, let's say, my family, right? I mean, my family is my pride and joy, right? So if I have a son, let's say, that graduated high school last year and he did well, and he's in yeshiva, and he's all that's also meaningful. Like, everything, all these things are meaningful, but this just happened yesterday, so it just came to mind. And to me, I feel like, this is what makes life special. Like, when you're older one day and you look back and you say, well, my net worth was this, but it could have been this if I would have, maybe done this investment and not this one, or whatever. I don't know. I've never been 90, but, but I like to think that when I'm 90, I'm going to look back on these one-on-one human interactions with each of your kids, with your spouse, with your close friends, or with another human being that you're not that close with.
Right.
But let's say you went to the Levaya, you went to the Shiva, you said something for 5 seconds, that might help another person, and to me, like, this is a huge success. This is a life moment, like an impactful moment that stays with you,
Absolutely.
And I think we all in our lives are on the receiving end of these moments, and we're on the giving ends of these moments. And that's what life's about. I think that's deep down why, someone like you values and prioritizes having these conversations with people, whether they're on camera or off camera. I always get the most incredibly positive voice notes from you with compliments, especially in Russian. When you talk to me in Russian, I feel like it's one of my grandparents, because you'll say these like "молодец," and I'm like, how do you even translate "молодец" to English? I don't know, like good job, good going, excellent one, but like, that's what life's all about, the people in our lives. Ultimately, at work, you're working with people, at family, community, shul, it all boils down to people. And I think these are life's moments,
Just to dovetail what you're saying, I believe exactly what you're saying, that the quality of your life really a lot of times depends on the quality of your relationships. So having good relationships at home, having good relationships with your community, and just people in general, it makes life much more meaningful, purposeful, and it adds on. It really adds on, and it's beautiful. It's
100%.
So, and if you had to write one line or one paragraph of a personal mission statement, what would it be?
I don't know. I'd have to think about that. A one paragraph or one line mission statement for life.
For life, or if you're talking to if you're giving eitzes to a friend, a colleague, or even your own child. Which actually, that was another question I was going to ask you. I haven't gotten to it yet. Was chinuch? If you can give them a mission statement on life, or on, it could be on any topic, what would you say? Because there's so many different things to derive from and to think about, and life is so, in many ways, complex, and it has different types of challenges that arise. What would be Yosef Golubchik's mission statement if you ever thought of that.
Yeah. You know what's funny? I'll say 3 words. Relentless forward progress.
Wow.
Relentless forward progress. And it sounds cliche, but it's something I'm borrowing from the world of ultra running, okay, which is basically a sport where they're running past the marathon distance, 50 mile, 100 mile, and in that sport, even the world's fittest people have ups and downs during those races. They go on for 24 hours, sometimes longer. They could get nauseous, they could get hurt. Sometimes they'll walk, sometimes they'll stop and then take a break and then resume, but they always have to be moving forward one way or the other. Wow. That's the name of the game. It doesn't matter how fast, And I think that as Jews, and as people, just that's what it's about. And it sounds very like rat race, but it's not. I mean that in every sense of the phrase. Relentless forward progress as a person, always trying to be. You meet some 55-year-olds, and you feel like they're less patient than a 19-year-old you meet.
Right.
You're like, how does that make sense? You're like, older person, they don't have patience. It's like, well, they didn't work on themselves. Their body got older, but they're regressing to be more like a young child.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Meaning, we believe the older you get, the more refined your character should be, the more you have perspective, the more you understand priorities, the more wisdom you have, the more knowledge you have, the more things you've seen, so you can have, that discerning kind of wisdom. So relentless forward progress, working on yourself always as a person, whether it's religiously, learning Torah, midos, everything, as a family, what kind of spouse are you? What kind of parent are you? What kind of sibling are you? What kind of grandparent are you, or grandson you are? Whatever stage of life you're in, always pushing forward. And that goes for everything. You have a career. I don't care if you're a business owner or you work for someone or whatever it is you're doing at work. You want to, just for your own psyche, be successful at whatever you're doing. You know what I mean? You don't want to be stagnant, because if you're going to be stagnant in this, it's just going to spill over into other areas of life where you're going to be stagnant at work. You're going to be stagnant maybe in your relationships, right? So you always want to be growing. You're working for somebody. You have an obligation. Yes, they pay you a salary, but you have an obligation to do a good job for them. You have clients within where you work. You have an obligation to bring excellence for them. So always just pushing forward, growing, and what you're doing professionally, personally, with your relationships, internally for yourself, in your religion, in your hobbies. You can get so much fulfillment from your hobbies. I don't care if you're an artist and you like to paint or draw. Could be you like to build things out of wood. Whatever it is, you could always be learning and getting better and advancing. You know what I mean? And it doesn't stop at any age. So I think that's it, and again, I mean it in a very healthy, holistic way, not in a cutthroat,
right,
rat race kind of way.
It's powerful,
you know what I mean?
That's very powerful.
Yeah, totally.
I've spoken to a lot of people that have been married for 5 years, 30 years, 40 years, and I always like to get their perspective, because I feel that being married is one of the most important decisions we ever make in our lives, really. Do you have any eitzes, any advice you can give the younger generation, the middle-aged generation, anybody who's getting married, dating, just any advice you can personally give in terms of being a good spouse, but also having the most amazing shalom bayis? Any eitzes that you've learned, that you've seen?
That's a great question. I think that's a huge question, right?
Yeah,
you could have not just an episode dedicated to that. You could have a whole separate podcast just for shalom bayis. And there are people I've seen clips online from people who are have 30, 35 years as a marriage therapist, and then they start a social media channel on whatever it is, and they come up with these little videos. Some really good stuff out there. I don't know where to start. I have been married 18 and a half years. I think I've learned a lot about marriage. I would have a million tips for people, for a young person, for a not so young person, someone that's newly married, someone who's married a long time. I'll say that I'll use the word perspective. Perspective is very important. Perspective is something that if you try to have perspective in your marriage and like big picture, it will help with a lot of things. So I'll give a few examples. One is like, criticism and negativity and things like that. If you have perspective, right? I saw a video once from Lori Palatnik like 20 years ago.
She's amazing.
She's like I don't know exactly who she is, but she's like a female Aish Kiruv person, like personality speaker, maybe author. I don't know. She has great videos. So I remember she said something like, when I want to bring something up with my husband that bothered me that he did, I give it the 48-hour rule or even 72-hour rule, something like that. I wait 48 or 72 hours, whatever it is.
Wow.
And then I see if I could still even remember, if I didn't write it down, like what was it that bothered me. Probably 100 things have happened since then. I forgot all about it. It maybe bothered me in that moment for 5 minutes, but maybe it even bothered me for a whole day or an afternoon, but not for 2 days, not for 3, not after I've had time to sleep overnight. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and now, you don't want to like bury things forever, right? Something is, well, that's the point, right? If it's something that's coming up every day or whatever, and it's something important, then there are ways to approach, but not every single little thing. So, needs to be brought up. So that's perspective, like
that's great
it's also, and by the way, even if it is something you then have to bring up, now it's later, you're a little removed from it. So the sting is not there as much.
Right.
It's not gonna, it's gonna be more palatable. It's gonna be more easy to hear and easier to talk about, and more, it's not going to be like heated in the moment. You know what I mean? So let's just say, for an example, let's say, I don't know, you can't handle spicy food and your wife cooks really spicy. So if she worked all day hard on a meal, and in the meal you tell her like, I can't eat this, it's so spicy, she's going to feel bad, she's going to feel insulted, whatever. Right. But if you mention it like days later, you're like, by the way, I got stomach problems, I don't know, whatever, like, so perspective. I think also perspective, for big picture things, like, I think a lot of people don't realize that you're going to go through all different stages in your marriage. Like, I once heard this quote, like, most people will have more than one marriage in their lifetime. The question is will it be to the same person? Wow. And what that means, they don't mean get divorced and remarried to the same person. What they mean is, when you get married initially and you're in that like honeymoon phase, which could go on for a few years, or even many years, you're still in this kind of like infatuation phase where like through the dating, like your representative met their representative, not literally, right? But like you're putting on, and people might think like, well, what are you talking about? By the time you're married, especially married for a few months or a year, it's like, I've been totally myself around them. And that's true, but it's still, you probably haven't really been tested yet, usually. I think the second phase is maybe the longest phase, and that's when you God willing, have kids. And the having kids part comes at the same time is where you're most busy with work, right? Because early in your career, maybe you're like, you're junior, you don't have tons of responsibility. Right. Like you may work long hours. Right. Let's say you're like an accountant, like a 24, 25-year-old accountant. It's like tax season, I'm working 2 a.m. Yes, you're working a lot of hours, but you're not in charge of as much as you will be, hopefully, when you're 45 years old in your career, and you're managing teams and you have bigger accounts and things. And so it's not just about time spent, it's about headspace and how much responsibility is on your shoulders. So these child-raising years coincide with the most stressful years of your career, which coincide with the most stressful financial, economic period of your marriage. I mean, right? So most having the most kids costs the most, have to perform at work the best, you know what I mean? And then as you get older, you have like less young kids, your kids are growing up. And by the way, I'm not speaking from experience because I'm right now in the thick of it. Right. Like I have older kids who are as old as 17, turning 18 soon and out of the house. And then I have a 3-year-old and I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old at home also. Wow. So I have young kids also. But from what I hear from people, it's very important to proactively work on your relationship during those middle years to actually prioritize the marriage even ahead of your own kids. You might say, what do you mean? My spouse is not even blood, It's my kids are my blood. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm genetically related to them. Like biologically, like my spouse. Like what do you mean? I can't. But no, it's like if you work on your marriage and you have a good marriage, it's actually what's best for your kids.
Yes,
that's what's best for them. So the kids need to understand. That's number one. Number two, while they're growing up. Number two, they watch that their whole childhood, and it sets them up for success in their marriage. So you're actually, by prioritizing your marriage, you're helping your kids twofold during their childhood, so they grow up in a less stressful home, where there's shalom bayis. Still going to be stressed no matter what, but if there's good, solid shalom bayis, the kids will feel stability and confidence, and then when they are married one day, they'll have that success. So you're helping them twofold. So prioritizing your marriage during those years, really very proactively. That means putting your spouse before your kids sometimes. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like you're at the pizza shop, you call it, hey, should I get you anything? Or like you're at the table, you give your spouse a piece before your kids. You might think, oh, but he's a 3-year-old, he's helpless. It's like, okay, you'll give him 2. But they need to understand, that marriage means you are like inseparable.
Wow.
You're a unit. You know what I mean? Like you're linked together. Like you know what I mean? And I think that unfortunately, what happens to some people is they're not mindful on this. They're not mindful of this. They don't have that perspective. During those child rearing years, they think everything's kind of fine because there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of distractions, and you maybe don't even have the time or energy to fight. But then the kids all move out, and you're left there with your house. And it's not like when you were alone with them at the beginning of the marriage, Everyone's a little older, everyone's a little more tired, everyone has their, you have your scars from decades of this and that. And now you're left there looking at each other, you're all alone, and now it's like, now you enter this third stage. Now, it's like anything in life. If you've been preparing for it and laying the foundation and strengthening that house, reinforcing it all these years, you're going to be left with a really strong house. You've been updating the house. So you're left with this beautiful, well-built, nice-looking house. And that's your relationship. That's your marriage when you're 50 or 55. And you can still have, Mitzvah Hashem, many years of good health. You can, spend time together and hopefully travel and have much nachas from your kids and grandkids and Mitzvah Hashem and all these things. But if you haven't been working on it, now, one of two things are going to happen. Either you're not going to be happy, chas v'shalom, you know what I mean?
Right.
Or you're going to have to now do the work now, you know what I mean? And, I don't know. I don't know if that's easier or harder, but I think it's better to prepare, right? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure,
That's right.
So I would say that that's kind of good long-term advice and perspective that applies to people in all different various stages, not just the newlyweds or engaged people, but
amazing. Wow.
And then the other thing I'll just say is like, again, I hear this from people. I'm married 18 and a half years. I hear this from people that are married 30, 40 years, is that it's very, very rare that someone, will fight with their spouse on some specific point or a group of points for many years and then win and then, like change them and like fix that thing. It's very rare. Usually what you see is like fascinating. You see like an older couple, they're fighting about something, and if you dig and find out, they've been fighting about this thing forever.
Right.
And nothing's changed. They're just still fighting about it because neither one was willing to change. I think now obviously whatever, they stayed together, they focused on the positive, whatever. But I think if like someone realizes this, they kind of realize like, if there's something, obviously people are going to mold a custom hybrid life together. So to say you want to change the other person sounds unhealthy and toxic. Right. You don't want to do that, obviously. But at the same time, I find like people grow together and they form their own kind of unique hashkafa.
Yeah.
It could be each one came into the marriage with their own slightly different hashkafa, and then maybe at the beginning there's some discrepancies that need to be worked out, and then they build their own thing. They do the same thing with what they eat in the home, with the menu of the house. They do the same thing with their style on the house and decor. They do the same thing with more important things, right? Like how to raise the kids. And are you going to be an open home or a closed home? Like, you know, what's your kind of approach to like having guests and things like that? Like all these things, you end up building that together. You know what I mean? So, you know, so I think that's, you know, I think that's also,
it's powerful. No, it's great. I think it's great advice. Wow. Yossi.
Yeah.
We should do a part 2, but there's a lot more conversations we didn't have. But
Right.
I'm so happy that you were able to carve out the time to be here with me and do this podcast. So,
yeah, it was really a pleasure. I always love talking to you, and I figured, you know, we could just do it naturally, pretend like the cameras aren't here, the mics aren't here, and just talk. And then, you know, if this could help anybody out there, they hear something, and if it's interesting to somebody, they're washing the dishes or they're driving or they're you know, they're whatever, folding laundry, you just put something on, you know, and why not, you know?
It's amazing. Yossi, thank you so much for your vulnerability, for your openness, for your honesty, sharing personal, you know, experiences and personal advice. It's powerful.
Absolutely. My
Thank
pleasure.
you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, Yossi.
Very good. Let's see who's calling me here. That's my dad.
Awesome.